Samuel, a 79-year-old veteran, never imagined that a simple trip to the ATM on a rainy night would lead to a fateful confrontation. As raindrops fell around him, he found himself cornered by Jake, a young robber whose intentions were far from innocent. With a weather-beaten hand clutching his wallet, Samuel's mind traveled back to his days in the military, where discipline and training had shaped his life. But with Jake's blade gleaming in the dim light, Samuel's true strength would be put to the test like never before. What drove this young man to make such a desperate decision? Samuel's courage and instinct for survival would turn this frightening encounter into something surprising. As the soft streetlights illuminated his path, the man with skin marked by decades of hard work seemed like just another elderly man on a nighttime stroll. Yet his life held deep stories and experiences that had prepared him for this very moment. As he approached the ATM, flashes of his past as a decorated soldier flashed through his mind: the jungle, the sounds of gunfire, and the weight of responsibility. Even after so long since he hung up his uniform, vigilance and discipline remained alive. Alone under the glow of a streetlight, Samuel watched the young man approaching with an attitude that aroused suspicion. As he inserted his card into the machine, his watchful gaze caught the reflection of the man advancing with firm steps. His body, almost by reflex, began to prepare. Then he heard, "Hey, veteran," the voice full of false friendliness. Samuel turned slowly, facing the young man whose mischievous smile revealed his true intentions. What would happen next would change both of their lives. Stay tuned to learn how Samuel faced this moment and how his story can inspire you. Samuel kept his composure, his voice calm and controlled as he studied the young man in front of him. The young man, with disheveled hair and shabby clothes, appeared to be in his early 20s. However, it was the menacing glint of a knife in his hand that caught Samuel's attention. The assailant, later identified as Jake, swung the blade in the dim light with overconfidence. "Why don't you give me your wallet, Grandpa? No need to complicate things." Jake's demeanor revealed that he had been in situations like this before. In his mind, Samuel was just another helpless victim, an elderly man who would hand over his money without question. But Jake had not expected what was to come next. Instead of giving in to fear or hurriedly reaching for his wallet, Samuel stood his ground, his eyes focused on the assailant. His voice remained calm, almost as if he were speaking to an old acquaintance. "Son, think carefully about what you're about to do." For a brief moment, Jake's confidence wavered. He hadn't expected this reaction, much less such a disconcerting calm. "What are you talking about, old man?" "Just give me the money," he replied impatiently. Samuel took a step forward, his movements slow and controlled. "Are you sure you want to go down this road? Because I promise you, it won't end the way you think it will." Doubt crossed Jake's face, but he pushed the thought away, tightening his grip on the knife. "Last chance, Grandpa. The wallet, now." Samuel sighed, not afraid, but with a hint of disappointment. "I was hoping we could resolve this another way," he said, his eyes firmly fixed on Jake's. "But it seems some lessons have to be learned the hard way." What happened next happened so fast that Jake barely had time to react. One moment he was still holding the knife, certain of his control over the situation, the next he was still holding the knife. The next, a swift movement sent his gun tumbling to the ground, and before he could reach for it, he felt his arm being twisted and pinned. Jake struggled against the grip, but it was like trying to bend steel. He could hardly believe the old man's strength. "Now, I think we can have a serious talk about your choices," Samuel said, his voice calm. Jake, stunned, tried to process what had just happened. This was not what he had expected. Old people were supposed to be easy targets. But now, fear began to replace his arrogance as he realized the mistake he had made. Jake stammered, "Who are you?" as he tried to turn his head to face Samuel. The man loosened his grip just enough for Jake to turn around. His eyes, filled with determination and restrained anger, conveyed something more than simple authority. "I'm someone who's seen more than my fair share of violence in this world," Samuel said, his voice calm but heavy, "and I won't let it happen again." Jake's false confidence crumbled. For the first time, he really looked at Samuel, noticing the firmness in his hands and the strength in his stance. Samuel wasn't just any old man, but someone who'd had a lifetime of experiences Jake could barely imagine. I don't," Jake began, but Samuel cut him off with a firm look. "Keep that in mind, son. What matters now is what you do from here on out." Samuel's grip remained firm but without malice. "You have a choice. Do you want to continue on this path, or are you willing to consider a change?" Jake's eyes searched for a way out, but deep down he knew he was trapped. More than that, something in Samuel's words struck him unexpectedly. "I don't know," Jake whispered, his confusion and fear revealing. Samuel nodded, a faint understanding crossing his face. Admitting you don't know everything is the first step to finding the answers. Reality began to set in for Jake. He'd come in expecting this to be an easy con, but he'd found someone who not only outmatched him physically, but challenged him mentally as well. "What are you going to do with me?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. "That's up to you," Samuel replied calmly. "I could call the police right now, or," Jake braced himself for the worst, but Samuel continued, "or we could talk. Talk about what brought you here, with a knife, trying to rob old men at ATMs. What brought you to this point, and what are you going to do from here?" The offer hung in the air as Jake weighed his options. He could try to run, but he knew he wouldn't get far. And even if he did, where would he go? Back to the same life that got him into this situation? Why give me this chance?" Jake finally asked, still scared, but now also curious. Samuel loosened his grip a little more, keeping an eye out for any sudden movements. "Because I've seen too many young people throw their lives away. Because I believe that everyone deserves a chance to change. And because, son, I think you're better than that." The night was charged with tension, and next to the ATM, Samuel Green waited for Jake's choice. Samuel's hand rested lightly on Jake's shoulder, and the young man's posture, once aggressive, now reflected a mixture of shame and timid hope. The unexpected conversation seemed to offer Jake a chance to follow a different path. However, fate took an unexpected turn when a sudden shout shattered the silence, causing both of them to turn toward the sound coming from the sidewalk. A burly man, his face contorted with rage, was approaching quickly. Jake's eyes widened with fear and recognition. "Eddie," he whispered, his voice shaking. Samuel's military instincts kicked in. In a split second, he assessed the approaching man. Eddie, at over 6 feet tall and with muscles tensed beneath his tight shirt, was no ordinary criminal. His walk, fluid as a fighter's, made it clear he had training. "What's going on here?" Eddie growled, his eyes flickering between Jake and Samuel. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes, and you're here talking to this guy?" Jake tried to stammer out an explanation, but Eddie wasn't interested. His focus was on Samuel, his anger growing as he took in the situation. "You think you can mess with my partner, old man?" Eddie took a threatening step. "I'll show you what happens to those who meddle." Samuel's combat-seasoned mind quickly assessed his opponent's movements. Eddie was not only strong, but he had technique, probably some kind of martial art. In a calm voice, despite the danger, Samuel advised, "Son, I suggest you think carefully about what you're going to do next. This doesn't have to end badly." Eddie laughed sarcastically. "It will end badly, yes, but for you." Snapping his fingers, he advanced, a predatory smile on his face. Samuel knew he had to act quickly, for Eddie had youth and strength on his side. The moment Eddie took another step, Samuel moved with surprising agility for his age. He knocked over a nearby trash can, spilling its contents across the sidewalk, catching Eddie by surprise. The big man stumbled slightly, his eyes darting to the mess at his feet. That was all the time Samuel needed. He positioned himself at a strategic angle, and before Eddie could react, Samuel was in action. What followed was too fast for the few onlookers who were beginning to gather. Samuel's hands moved with precision, striking specific points on Eddie's body. To the unwary observer, they might have looked like random blows, but each one was calculated and devastatingly effective. Eddie's eyes widened in shock as his body began to fail him. His legs gave out, and his arms felt like dead weights. Within seconds, he was on the ground, defeated, gasping in pain and disbelief. What did you do to me?" Eddie stammered, trying unsuccessfully to get up. "Pressure points," Samuel replied firmly. "The human body is a complex machine. Touch the right places, and even the strongest engine will stop working." A small crowd was beginning to form around them, drawn by the commotion. Murmurs spread among the spectators as they tried to process what they were seeing. An elderly gentleman, seemingly harmless, effortlessly knocking down a much younger and stronger man. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "I've never seen anything like it. Who is this guy?" Cell phones were already starting to appear, recording what had happened. Some were calling the authorities, but no one dared to approach. Samuel, always aware of his surroundings, noticed the rising tension. He knew he needed to calm the situation quickly. He turned to Eddie, who was still struggling to regain control of his limbs. "Now, I think it's time we had a talk about the choices you're making," Samuel said, his tone firm but not hostile. He glanced at Jake, who until then had remained paralyzed, watching everything in silence. With a hesitant movement, Jake finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, man." Jake's voice trembling, "I didn't mean for this to happen, Mr. Green. He was trying to help me." Eddie's face, once filled with anger, now held a confused expression, a mix of pain and surprise. "Help you? What are you talking about?" he asked, still processing the situation. Samuel approached Eddie carefully, his movements slow and measured. "What your friend means," Samuel began, "is that sometimes life gives us unexpected chances to change. Tonight was one of those opportunities for Jake, and maybe for you too." Eddie looked at Samuel suspiciously, his gaze bouncing between the older man and Jake, trying to figure out what was really going on. "Who are you, anyway?" he asked, with a mixture of respect and apprehension. The rising sound of sirens filled the air, as police cars approached, their red and blue lights illuminating the scene. Jake and Eddie, who had previously been full of arrogance, now looked uncertain, almost dejected. A tall, burly police officer stepped out of his car, his gray hair gleaming in the lights, and quickly surveyed the scene. Upon seeing Samuel, his expression changed from surprise to deep respect. "Sergeant Green," he said in a tone of recognition. The crowd murmured in amazement. The sergeant saluted quickly, to which Samuel responded with a small nod. "Today it's just Samuel," he said with a slight smile. The officer, identified as Johnson, smiled back. "To me, you'll always be Sergeant Green." With that, he walked over, wanting to understand what had happened here. As Samuel explained the events, Jake and Eddie listened in silence, unable to hide their surprise. "Wait," Jake interrupted, his voice shaking. "You're a war hero?" Samuel turned, his expression softening. "I served my country, I did what I was supposed to do, like so many others." Eddie, still trying to take it all in, said, "But, you're just an old man, how did you do that?" The disbelief in his voice was clear. Officer Johnson laughed softly. "You two picked the wrong man to mess with. Sergeant Green is a legend around here, an expert in hand-to-hand combat and one of the best I've ever known." With that revelation, the reality of the situation finally sank in for the two young men. Their defiant postures gave way to shame and regret. Samuel, sensing the change, knelt before them. "Listen," he said quietly, "what you did was wrong. You made decisions that could have destroyed your lives and hurt others. But the truth about choices is that you can always make new ones." Jake and Eddie were surprised by the lack of condemnation in Samuel's words. "Life isn't about the mistakes you make," he continued. It's about what you do from now on. It's never too late to change course, to get back on the right path. The question is, are you willing to take the first step? Silence hung in the air for a moment, until Jake, almost in a whisper, replied, I want to, but I don't know how. Eddie, lacking his usual confidence, added, we've messed up so much, who would give us another chance now? Samuel smiled warmly. You'd be surprised. This community, which you thought was full of easy targets, is also full of people willing to give you second chances, if you're willing to put in the effort. As if waiting for the right moment, a voice rose from the crowd. He's right, you know. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman, lean forward. Mr. Green helped my grandson get out of a bad way. Now he's in college, if you can believe that. Soon, more voices began to echo, sharing stories of how Samuel had impacted their lives and the community. Each account painted a picture of a man who, in his retirement years, quietly dedicated himself to improving the lives of those around him. As they listened to these stories, Jake and Eddie's expressions began to change. The shame was still there, but now it was accompanied by a glimmer of hope. Feeling a bit disconcerted by the outpouring of praise, Samuel held up his hands in a calming gesture, trying to calm the crowd. Come on, don't overreact. I'm just one man doing my part. We all have a role to play in making our community stronger, he said. Officer Johnson, who had been watching with a smile, stepped forward. Well, Sergeant, as much as I'd like to turn this into a thank you party, we have some official business to attend to. Samuel nodded in understanding and turned to Jake and Eddie. I'm not going to lie to you guys. There are consequences for what you did today, but remember what I said, it's what you do next that matters. Use this as a turning point, he advised. As the officers began to handcuff Jake and Eddie, something unexpected happened. Eddie, the larger of the two and previously filled with rage, looked directly at Samuel and, in a hoarse voice, thanked him, thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave up on ourselves. Jake added, almost inaudibly, we'll try to do better, I promise. Samuel placed a hand on each of their shoulders and said, that's all anyone can ask for. Remember, the longest journey begins with a single step, and you took that step today. The rest is up to you. As the boys were led away by the police, the crowd began to disperse, but many still stared at Samuel, murmuring about what they had witnessed. Feeling his task complete, he gathered up his belongings, including the wallet that had been the reason for his trip to the ATM. Officer Johnson approached one last time. You know, Sergeant, we could use a statement from you at the police station. With a soft smile, Samuel declined. I think you have everything you need, officer. These boys need guidance right now, not just punishment. I trust you to remember that. Johnson nodded, assuring them that they would do the right thing. As Samuel walked away from the scene, a round of applause erupted, accompanied by shouts of, thank you, Mr. Green, and, you're a hero. He raised his hand in recognition, but he didn't stop or look back. His stride was steady and easy, just as it had been when he arrived, and as he walked away, the hubbub of the crowd faded, replaced by the quiet sounds of the night. Arriving at his modest home, Samuel paused for a moment on the porch, looking back in the direction he had come from. His thoughts were with Jake and Eddie, and he hoped that tonight would truly mark a turning point for them both. With a soft sigh, he walked inside and closed the door behind him, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the evening were intense, but they reminded him that his retirement did not mean the end of his mission. Rather, it meant finding new ways to serve, new battles to face, this time with wisdom and compassion. Sitting in his favorite chair, his gaze fell on an old photograph on the mantelpiece, showing a younger version of himself in military uniform, surrounded by his comrades. He smiled, remembering how the lessons he had learned during his service continued to shape his life and the lives of those around him. The ticking of the clock on the wall marked the passage of time, but to Samuel, it felt like a new chapter was just beginning. Sleep began to overtake him, and his last thoughts were of Jake and Eddie. He said a silent prayer for them, wishing they would find the strength to embrace the new opportunity they had been given. With a mental note to visit the community center the next day, Samuel fell asleep, knowing there was still much work to be done, lives to change, and hope to cultivate. Outside, night fell silent, and the drama that had unfolded earlier was now just a memory, the consequences of which would reverberate through the community for a long time to come. On a seemingly ordinary night, one man decided to look beyond appearances and offer a chance for redemption. In the days that followed, in homes across the neighborhood, residents recalled the events with admiration for the courage and compassion of a man they had long known only as Mr. Green. Parents taught their children about the value of second chances and kindness, while neighbors were inspired to strengthen community ties. In a cell, two young men silently reflected on the encounter that had changed their lives forever. The seeds of change had been planted, and only time would tell what they would become. As dawn broke, the neighborhood resumed its usual rhythm. People headed to work, school, or going about their daily business, but there was something different in the air, a renewed spirit of purpose and community. In his simple home, Samuel Green woke to another day, ready to continue his mission to make the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. The story of that night would be told over and over again, growing with each new version, but always remaining a testament to the power of compassion and the potential for transformation. As the sun rose, illuminating the neighborhood, life moved forward with new hope. A stronger sense of community and a greater appreciation for the unsung heroes who walk alongside us every day spread. And somewhere in the city, in a community center, classroom, or counseling session, the actions of that night continued to reverberate, impacting lives in ways that even Samuel could not have foreseen. His mission, which he thought was complete, was only just beginning. As a mentor and guide now, he was prepared for the challenges that the new day would bring. 3 months had passed since that night at the ATM, and the world had changed in subtle and profound ways. As Samuel entered the community center, the familiar smell of coffee and the buzz of conversation greeted him, bringing a smile to his face. His eyes roamed the room, taking in the people gathered there, including Jake, who sat in a reserved position, symbolizing the power of second chances. As Samuel took his place at the front of the group, he spotted Eddie in the back row, the other young man involved in the incident. His presence still made some uncomfortable, but Samuel insisted that he, like Jake, deserved a chance at redemption. In his calm, steady voice, Samuel began the meeting, reminding everyone that every step toward change was significant, no matter how small. The community center that had nearly closed its doors was now thriving, transformed into a place of welcome and transformation, thanks to the movement Samuel had inspired. The local newspaper had highlighted the impact of his actions with a cover story, but Samuel had always preferred to work behind the scenes. But he understood that by touching the lives of so many, his mission had expanded. And so, once again, he was there, guiding, advising and believing in each person's ability to change, while the community grew stronger, united by a greater purpose. Samuel looked at Jake and gestured for him to share with the group. With fidgety hands, the young man slowly stood up. "Hi, guys," he began quietly. "I've been clean for 2 months and started my GED classes last week." The group responded with applause and encouragement, and Jake, still embarrassed, smiled with a mixture of pride and shyness. Samuel gave him a calm look, urging him on. "I never thought I'd get here," Jake admitted, speaking with more confidence now. "Before that night with Mr. Green, I thought my life was over. But now, it's like I can see a future for myself. And I owe it to this group, especially Mr. Green." When Jake finally sat down, relieved to be done, Samuel felt a rush of emotion. Over the years, he had helped many get back on their feet, but something about this experience was different. It was about restoring lives that had nearly been destroyed and finding hope in the midst of darkness. The meeting continued with other members sharing their experiences of struggle and triumph, and Samuel, as always, listened attentively, offering words of support and practical advice. At the end, he noticed Eddie, fidgeting in his corner, clearly hesitant to speak up. "Eddie," Samuel called gently, "is there anything you'd like to share with the group?" All eyes turned to him. After a brief moment of silence, Eddie cleared his throat, without his usual arrogance. "I got a job," he said, the words coming out quickly. "It's nothing big, just construction work, but it's honest work." Silence filled the room for a second, but soon the applause grew louder, filling the room. Eddie, normally serious, smiled shyly, revealing a vulnerability few knew about. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, Samuel approached Eddie, whose height and build normally made him seem intimidating, but now he seemed almost fragile. "I'm proud of you," Samuel said, placing his hand on the young man's arm. "The first step is always the hardest." Eddie nodded, his eyes cast toward the floor. "I can't stop thinking about that night," he confessed quietly. "How everything could have been different. I was so full of anger. I thought the world owed me something. But you showed me a different path." Samuel smiled, a mix of sadness and hope reflected in his eyes. "The world doesn't owe us anything, Eddie. But we owe it to ourselves to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. You're on that path now. The rest is up to you." As Eddie left the room, Samuel felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he found Officer Johnson, who grinned broadly. "Sergeant Green," Johnson joked, saluting in an exaggerated manner. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Samuel laughed, shaking his head. "How many times do I have to tell you to call me Samuel?" Johnson chuckled. "At least one more time, Sergeant, at least one more time." The two of them stepped out into the warm late morning sunshine, while the community center parking lot was bustling with people chatting in small groups and swapping stories. "I have to admit," Johnson said, now more serious. "What you're doing here is making a real difference. We've seen a 15% drop in petty crime since this program started." Samuel raised his eyebrows. "Are you here to talk about crime statistics?" Johnson laughed. "No, actually the chief wants to meet with you. He heard about your work and has a proposal." Samuel's interest was piqued. "Proposal? What kind of proposal?" Johnson explained, visibly excited. "He wants to expand your program. Set up centers like this in other neighborhoods and train other veterans to do what you're doing here." Samuel sat in silence, absorbing the magnitude of this idea. He had never imagined that his simple act of kindness that night could lead to something so grand. The thought of being able to help other communities was exciting, but also a little scary. "I'll have to think about it," Samuel replied. "This isn't just about me, it's about the community we've built here." Johnson nodded understandingly. "Sure, the chief just wants to talk. No pressure." As the officer walked back to his car, Samuel was lost in thought. The idea of expanding the program was exciting, but he wondered if the spirit of connection and closeness they had here could be maintained on a larger scale. His musings were interrupted by the quick footsteps of Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had been by his side since the beginning of this journey. That evening, as Samuel was leaving the ATM, he heard a familiar voice calling his name from afar. "Mr. Green." "Oh, Mr. Green." It was Mrs. Thompson, panting as she approached as quickly as her cane would carry her. Samuel greeted her with a warm smile and offered his arm to steady her. "What a nice surprise. What brings you here today?" he asked. The woman's eyes lit up with excitement. "I have news about my grandson, Tommy. Remember him? You helped him get into college." Samuel nodded, remembering the young man who had once seemed destined for a difficult life but had managed to turn things around in an amazing way. "Of course I remember. How is he doing?" Mrs. Thompson beamed with pride. "He got accepted into an internship at the city hall. Can you believe it? My Tommy is working in the mayor's office." Samuel's heart swelled with joy at this. Moments like these were what he did for work. "This is wonderful," he said, genuinely happy for Tommy. As the woman talked about her grandson's accomplishments, Samuel couldn't help but think about the offer he had received earlier, a reminder that his work was touching lives in ways he never imagined. The rest of the day passed at a brisk pace. He met with local business owners interested in providing opportunities for program participants, mentored a couple struggling with addiction, and even found time to help Jake with his GED studies. By the end of the day, Samuel was physically exhausted but filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. As he closed up the community center, the sky tinged with vibrant sunset hues, he noticed a familiar figure in the distance, leaning against a car in the parking lot. It was Eddie, his large silhouette casting a long shadow on the asphalt. "Eddie!" Samuel called, approaching. "Is everything okay?" Eddie, visibly tense, straightened up. "Mr. Green, I need to talk to you about something important," he said hesitantly. Samuel led him to a nearby bench, where they could sit. "I've been offered a job," Eddie began, his voice low and uncertain. "It's a good job, with benefits and everything, but it's in another state." Samuel listened intently, recognizing Eddie's dilemma. "This sounds like a great opportunity, but I feel like there's more at stake," Samuel replied. Eddie nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I'm scared, Mr. Green. Scared to leave, to start over. But I'm also scared to stay and fall back into old habits. I don't know what to do." Samuel leaned in, choosing his words carefully, aware of the impact his answer might have. "Remember what I told you that night at the ATM about choices?" Eddie smiled slightly. "You said it's never too late to change course." "Exactly," Samuel continued. "And sometimes changing course means taking a leap in the dark. It's okay to be scared, Eddie, it's part of growing up. But don't let that fear keep you from embracing new opportunities." Eddie looked to Samuel for comfort. "What if I fail? What if I can't handle this on my own?" Samuel placed a firm, reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "You won't be alone. The lessons you've learned here, the strength you've found within yourself, will follow you wherever you go. And remember, I'm just a phone call away." As they talked about Eddie's hopes and fears, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about keeping people out of trouble, but about giving them the tools to build better lives. By the end of the conversation, Eddie had decided he would take the job, face his fears, and embrace the chance to start over. Samuel watched him go, feeling a mixture of pride and melancholy. Watching someone move on was always bittersweet, but it was part of growing up. As he walked home in the twilight, Samuel's mind returned to his boss's proposal. The idea of expanding the program to reach more communities and change more lives was beginning to take root in his imagination. He realized that while the personal touch was essential in the beginning, the real power of what they had built lay in the community itself, in people like Jake, Eddie, and Mrs. Thompson. When he got home, Samuel made a decision. He would meet with his boss, listen to what he had to say, and see if there was a way to expand the program without losing its essence. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew that nothing worthwhile ever was. Sitting in his favorite chair, exhausted but invigorated, his eyes fell on an old photograph of himself in military uniform on the mantelpiece, reminder that his new calling was as meaningful as his old one. Surrounded by his fellow officers, Samuel smiled as he thought about how his mission had changed over the years. He had once defended his country in foreign lands, but now he was dedicated to bringing hope to the streets of his own neighborhood. As he walked, his mind filled with visions of the future, more community centers springing up, more lives being touched, and positive impact spreading in ways he could only imagine. The next morning, the day dawned bright and promising. Samuel was up early, his head full of ideas for his upcoming meeting with the police chief. As he drove through the neighborhood on his way to the community center, he noticed subtle changes: newly renovated storefronts, fewer people loitering on street corners, and a general sense of renewal in the air. When he arrived at the center, he found Jake waiting anxiously. "Mr. Green, I did it. I passed my first GED test." Samuel smiled broadly. That's amazing, Jake. I knew you had this potential. As they celebrated, more people arrived, and Samuel noticed a new visitor, a young woman in her early 20s who was clearly unsure of herself. He excused himself from Jake and walked over to her. "Welcome to the center," he said, his tone welcoming. "I'm Samuel Green. Is this your first time here?" She nodded shyly. "My name is Lisa. A friend told me about this place, said they could help me start over." Samuel smiled encouragingly. "Just being here has taken the first step, Lisa. Why don't you join our meeting? You don't have to talk, just listen and see if this environment can give you the support you need." During the meeting, Samuel was struck by the diversity of stories present. Each person had their own challenges, but they were united by a desire for transformation. Jake proudly shared his progress, and Eddie said he was taking a new job out of town. Slowly, Lisa began to relax, realizing she was not alone in her struggles. After the meeting, Samuel helped Lisa enroll in a job training program and mediated a disagreement between two participants, using the opportunity to teach her about conflict resolution. He also found time to help Mrs. Thompson set up a video call with her grandson, watching with satisfaction as she talked about the internship she had secured. As the time for his meeting with the police chief approached, Samuel felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He knew this meeting could mark a major turning point, not only for him, but for all the community work he had been doing. When he arrived at the police station, Officer Johnson greeted him with a smile. "Ready to change the world, Sergeant?" Samuel laughed. "Let's take it slow, Johnson, one step at a time." Chief Markham's office was simple, dominated by a large desk strewn with papers. Markham, a stocky man with graying hair, stood to greet Samuel. "Sergeant Green, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about your work in the community." Samuel shook his boss's hand firmly. "The honor is mine, boss. And you can call me Samuel, I've been retired for a while now." Markham got straight to the point. "What you've done with your program is amazing. We've seen a reduction in crime rates, especially among young people, but more importantly, it's brought back a sense of hope to the neighborhood. That's why I want to expand the program. I think what you started could be replicated in other neighborhoods, and maybe even in other cities." Samuel thought about the proposal. The idea of expanding the project was exciting, but he had his doubts. "That's an interesting idea, boss. But I wonder how it would be possible to do that. The strength of our program is in the personal contact, in the relationships we build. I'm not sure it would be feasible on a larger scale." Chief Markham nodded, expecting the concern. "That's where you come in, Samuel. We're not trying to create a cold, impersonal structure. We want you to train other veterans, community leaders, or anyone who has the passion and commitment to make a difference. You've developed a model that works, and now we want you to teach others how to apply it." As Markham detailed his idea, Samuel pondered the possibilities. He thought about Jake, Eddie, Lisa, and the lives he had already helped change. The opportunity to expand that impact and create a network of support to reach even more people was enticing, but it also required careful consideration. "Chief," Samuel interrupted Markham's enthusiastic speech, "I understand your vision, and I appreciate what you're proposing, but we need to be careful. Every community has its own challenges and unique characteristics, and we can't simply replicate what we've done here and expect the same results anywhere." Markham nodded, acknowledging the seriousness of the issue. "You're right, Samuel. That's why we need your expertise. The idea is not to apply a one-size-fits-all model, but to teach others how to adapt the program to the needs of their communities." As the conversation progressed, Samuel began to feel more comfortable with the proposal. They discussed funding possibilities for pilot neighborhoods and how the training of new leaders could be structured. By the end of the meeting, a rough plan was emerging. "I'm going to need some time to think about it," Samuel said as he stood up, "and I want to talk to the people at the center. This isn't just my decision to make." Markham nodded understandingly. Sure, take your time, but remember, we have a real chance to make a lasting impact. I hope you'll give it serious thought. As he walked out of the police station, Samuel's mind was filled with mixed emotions. The proposal offered the opportunity to expand his work and touch even more lives, but it also meant taking on new responsibilities and challenges. Lost in his thoughts, he almost didn't notice Jake waiting anxiously for him outside. "Mr. Green." Jake called out, relief evident in his voice. "I've been waiting for you. I need your advice." Samuel frowned in concern. "What's wrong, Jake? Is everything okay?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Samuel recognized as a sign of nervousness. "I got a job offer. It's nothing big, but it's with a good company, and they're willing to accommodate my schedule with my GED classes." "That's awesome, Jake." Samuel replied, genuinely happy. "So what's the problem?" Jake looked away hesitantly. "The job is in the same neighborhood where I used to, where I did a lot of things I'm not proud of." Understanding quickly dawned on Samuel's face. "I get it. You're afraid of falling back into old habits, aren't you?" Jake shrugged, a worried look on his face. "What if I run into my old gang again? What if I'm not strong enough to resist?" Samuel placed a firm hand on Jake's shoulder, reassuring him. "The fact that you're even concerned about this shows how much you've grown." The old Jake wouldn't have thought twice about it. As they walked, Samuel continued, "Taking on this job doesn't mean you have to face your past alone. We can work together on strategies to deal with difficult situations. And remember, you now have a supportive community behind you." Jake's posture relaxed, and the fear in his eyes gave way to renewed hope. "Do you think I can do this, Mr. Green?" Samuel smiled, a mix of pride and determination on his face. "I know you can, Jake. But more importantly, you have to believe in it too. This job is your chance to rewrite your story, right where it all began." When they said goodbye, Jake seemed refreshed, with a new sense of purpose, and Samuel received yet another reminder that his work was an ongoing journey. The sun was already beginning to set, casting a golden light over the city streets, as if nature itself were offering a sign of renewal. As Samuel walked home, his thoughts swirled around his boss's proposal, Jake's dilemma, and the challenges and triumphs of the community center. It all seemed like part of a larger puzzle he was still trying to solve. As he approached his house, Samuel spotted a familiar figure sitting on the porch. It was Eddie, hunched over his hands, clearly deep in thought. "Eddie!" Samuel called, quickening his pace. "Is everything okay?" Eddie looked up, his face a mix of emotions. "Mr. Green. I need to talk to you before I leave. About work, about everything." Samuel sat down next to him on the porch step, the creak of the wood echoing softly. "I'm listening, Eddie. What's going on in your head?" Eddie took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for a difficult revelation. "I'm scared, Mr. Green. I'm scared of failing to start over, but I'm also scared of getting stuck in old habits. How do I know if I'm making the right decision?" Samuel nodded sympathetically, understanding the depth of Eddie's feelings. "Fear is part of the process of change, Eddie. It's okay to be scared. But let me ask you, what scares you more? The uncertainty of trying something new or the certainty of what might happen if you don't make that choice?" Eddie thought for a moment, mulling over Samuel's words. Finally, he answered quietly, "I want to be better, Mr. Green. I want to be the man you believed I could be." Samuel felt a warm glow of pride and affection for the young man beside him. "Eddie, you're already on that path. Taking this job and facing your fears is the true essence of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in spite of it." As they continued to talk, the streetlights began to come on, casting a soft, welcoming glow over the neighborhood. Samuel shared some personal stories, moments in his life where he faced doubt and uncertainty, and the difficult choices he had to make. At the end of the conversation, when Eddie stood to leave, he looked different, his shoulders were more upright, and there was a renewed determination in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Green. For everything. I don't know where I would be without you and the program." Samuel stood up too, hugging Eddie tightly. "Remember, Eddie, you're not alone. Distance doesn't change that. You have an entire community behind you, and we're just a phone call away if you need us." As Eddie's car disappeared around the bend, Samuel stood on the porch for a moment longer, watching the taillights disappear. He felt a mixture of pride and a gentle melancholy, the bittersweet feeling of watching someone drive away toward a promising future. Entering the house, he settled into his favorite chair, thoughts of the day still dancing through his mind. His boss's proposal, Jake's new opportunity, Eddie's farewell, all of it reflected the growth and evolution of the program he had helped build. His eyes fell on an old photograph on the mantelpiece of him in his military uniform. He smiled, realizing how his life's mission had changed, from protecting his country in distant lands to nurturing hope on the streets of his own community. That night, Samuel fell asleep with dreams filled with visions of the future, community centers sprouting across the city, lives being transformed, a ripple effect of positive impact he could only begin to imagine. The next morning dawned bright and full of promise. Samuel woke early, his mind already buzzing with ideas. He had made up his mind about his boss's proposal, but he knew he needed to discuss it with the people who mattered most, the community he had helped build downtown. As he walked through the neighborhood toward the community center, Samuel noticed subtle changes around him. The streets were cleaner, once boarded windows now displayed open signs, and the air felt fresh. In the center, a small crowd had already gathered, eager to learn more about the proposal. Word of the meeting with the chief had spread quickly, and everyone was curious to hear what Samuel had to say. He cleared his throat, and the chatter died down. "Good morning, everyone. I'm sure you heard about yesterday's meeting with the police chief. I'm here to clear the air and, more importantly, to hear your thoughts. This is not a decision I can make alone." Samuel then explained the chief's proposal, detailing the plan to expand the program to other neighborhoods, training new community leaders to implement similar initiatives throughout the city. As he spoke, I could see the mixed emotions on the faces before him, excitement, concern, curiosity. "I want to make it clear," Samuel continued firmly, "that this is not something I do alone. What we build here, we build together. So before I give an answer to the boss, I need to hear from you." Over the next few hours, the room filled with discussion. Jake shared his desire to help others who faced challenges like the ones he had overcome. Lisa, still new to the program, spoke about the importance of giving more access to others. Mrs. Thompson, ever cautious, expressed concern that expansion could dilute the personal touch that made the community so special. Samuel listened carefully to each voice, sensing the passion and commitment palpable in the room. When the discussion finally came to a close, he stood up again. "Thank you all for your honesty. And for the opinions. After listening to each of you and thinking a lot, I made my decision." The room fell silent, everyone paying attention to Samuel's answer. Samuel made a firm and clear decision. "I'm going to accept the chief's proposal, but with some conditions," he said. "We're not just going to replicate what we have here. We're going to train others to create projects that meet the specific needs of their own communities, and we're going to do it together." He looked around, locking eyes with each person in the room. "This isn't the end of what we've built here, it's the beginning of something bigger. We have the chance to use what we've learned, the connections we've made, to help even more people. But I can't do it alone. I need all of you on this new journey." Samuel's words brought a wave of enthusiasm, and conversations quickly began to flow, with ideas emerging about how to contribute. Jake approached Samuel, his eyes set on purpose. "Mr. Green, I want to help. Maybe I can share my story with young people who are where I was." Samuel smiled and put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "That's exactly the kind of involvement we need. Your experience, your journey, has immense power. As the meeting came to a close, people left the building full of energy and motivation for this new chapter. Samuel, for his part, was thrilled. This was beyond anything he had imagined when he met Jake and Eddie that night in front of the ATM. This was living proof that second chances, community support, and a belief in not giving up on people made a difference. Later, sitting in Chief Markham's office, Samuel outlined his vision for expanding the program. He felt that this project was not just about reducing crime or revitalizing neighborhoods, it was about transforming lives, one at a time, and creating a wave of hope that could spread far beyond the city. As the evening drew to a close, Samuel watched the activity around the community center, thinking about Jake, who was about to start a new job, Eddie, who was starting a new life in another state, and Lisa, who was taking her first steps toward a brighter future. He knew there were still many stories to be changed and many lives to be impacted. The work was far from over, in fact, it was just beginning. As the streetlights illuminated the neighborhood, he took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and lives to touch, but for now, he allowed himself to be present, grateful for the journey thus far and excited for what was to come. Before locking up the center, his eyes fell on a recently installed sign next to the door, with a phrase that had become the community's motto, "It's never too late to change your path." Samuel ran his fingers over the words, smiling. Yes, he thought, it's never too late. And sometimes, changing our own path means helping others find theirs. With one last look at the quiet street, he headed home, feeling accomplished but already focused on the next steps. The transformation had begun, and the impact could go far beyond what he imagined. The story of Samuel Green, the former sergeant turned mentor and community leader, was far from over. On the contrary, it was just beginning, as he continued to touch lives and strengthen communities in ways even he could not have foreseen. Under the starry sky, he felt deeply grateful to have found his true purpose, not in a distant land, but right here in the heart of his own community. And with each life he touched, new stories of hope and change unfolded, promising a brighter future for all. If Samuel's journey touched you, please share in the comments. Remember that even in adversity, courage, resilience, and compassion have the power to transform realities. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this.